HOA Karen fined me over my doghouse, so I reported her mansion for code violation. The doghouse that brought down a dynasty. The envelope hit my driveway with a soft flutter, landing face up so I could see the bright red violation notice stamped across it like a scarlet letter. My hands were still covered in sawdust from putting the finishing touches on the doghouse when I bent down to pick it up, the October morning air crisp against my skin. $500. They wanted $500 for what they called an unauthorized dog structure. I looked up from the paper to the modest wooden shelter I'd just built for my daughter Emma's rescue dog, then across the street to where Patricia Hawthorne's mansion sprawled across what used to be two separate lots. Every window blazed with light even in the daylight, and I could count at least 3 major additions that weren't there when I moved in 5 years ago. Something about that view made my jaw clench and my carpenter's eye twitch with recognition of code violations. My name is Daniel Porter, and I'm a single dad who used to swing hammers for a living before transitioning to project management at a construction firm downtown. When Emma begged me for months to adopt a dog from the local shelter, showing me pictures of sad-eyed mutts on her phone every morning over breakfast, I finally caved. We brought home Rusty, a sweet golden retriever mix with one floppy ear and eyes that seemed to understand exactly what heartbreak looked like. He deserved better than sleeping on our back patio, especially with winter coming. So, I did what any dad with carpentry skills and a guilty conscience would do. I built him a doghouse. Not just any doghouse, mind you. I crafted it to match our home's cedar siding and forest green trim, complete with architectural shingles that matched our roof. It was maybe 4 feet tall at the peak, painted to blend seamlessly with our property, and included a small covered porch where Rusty could sit and watch the neighborhood. Emma had insisted on the porch, claiming Rusty was sophisticated and needed a place to contemplate. The structure took me 3 weekends to complete, working mostly in the evenings after Emma went to bed. I'd installed proper insulation, weatherproofing, and even a small solar light so Rusty wouldn't be afraid in the dark. The whole thing probably cost me $200 in materials, but seeing Emma's face when she saw the finished product was worth every penny. She'd hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, whispering "Thank you, Daddy" into my ear with the kind of pure joy that makes single parenthood worth every sleepless night. The day after I finished it, Patricia Hawthorne marched across the street in her designer heels, clipboard in hand like a general inspecting troops. She introduced herself as the HOA vice president, though everyone in Oakwood Heights already knew who she was. Her mansion at the end of Sycamore Court was impossible to miss, a sprawling testament to what happened when someone had too much money and too little taste. "Mr. Porter, I presume," she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from years of wielding power over people's property values. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of makeup that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "That's right," I said, wiping sawdust from my hands on my jeans. "Can I help you with something?" "I'm here about your structure." She gestured toward Rusty's house with the kind of disdain usually reserved for roadkill. "I'm afraid it's in violation of our community standards." She circled my creation like a health inspector at a questionable restaurant, occasionally making notes and humming disapprovingly. Her heels clicked against the concrete with each step, creating a rhythm that somehow managed to sound judgmental. Rusty, for his part, watched from his new porch with what I swear was confusion, his tail wagging tentatively as if he couldn't decide whether this woman was a threat or just another neighbor. "It's very rustic," she said finally, the word dripping with condescension. "However, I'm afraid it violates Article 7, Section 3 of the Architectural Uniformity Code. All outdoor structures require prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee." "Which you happen to chair," I said, remembering the neighborhood gossip. "Which I happen to chair, yes." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure you understand the importance of maintaining property values in our community." I tried reasoning with her, explaining it was just a small shelter for our rescue dog, that I'd built it to match our home's architecture, that it was barely visible from the street. She cut me off mid-sentence, her voice dripping with false sympathy as she said the rules applied to everyone equally. "I'm sure you're a lovely family," she said, "but rules are rules. The fine will be $500 if the structure remains for more than 7 days without approval." "And how do I get approval?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Her smile widened, revealing teeth that were too white and too straight. "The next architectural review meeting isn't for 6 weeks, I'm afraid. These things take time, you understand." The math was clear. Remove it or pay up. But as I watched her walk back across the street, something nagged at me. Her heels clicked against the asphalt with the same judgmental rhythm, and I found myself studying her mansion with new eyes. Those additions she'd made, when exactly had they been approved? That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the violation notice while Emma played with Rusty in the backyard. Through the window, I watched Patricia's mansion, its excessive lighting making it look like a small city. A delivery truck pulled up to her back gate around 9 p.m., and workers began unloading what looked like marble countertops. Strange time for a delivery, especially in a residential neighborhood. "Daddy, are you okay?" Emma asked, appearing at my elbow with Rusty trailing behind her. She was still in her pajamas, her dark hair mussed from playing. "Just thinking, sweetheart," I said, pulling her onto my lap. "How would you feel if we had to take down Rusty's house?" Her face crumpled. "But why? He loves it. Look." She pointed to where Rusty had already dragged his favorite rope toy onto the little porch. "He's decorating." I hugged her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Don't worry. Daddy's going to figure something out." Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention to Patricia's property. More trucks arrived after dark. Construction sounds echoed from her property at odd hours, the whine of power tools, the beeping of machinery backing up, the shouts of workers. An entirely new structure appeared to be taking shape behind her main house, hidden from street view by strategic landscaping and a privacy fence that seemed to have appeared overnight. My carpenter's instincts were screaming. This wasn't normal residential construction. This was someone trying to hide something. I decided to do some research. At the county records office, I requested copies of all building permits filed for Patricia's address in the last 10 years. The clerk, a tired-looking woman named Dorothy, handed me a surprisingly thin folder. "That's it?" I asked. She shrugged. "Some folks are just low maintenance, I guess." The most recent permit was from 8 years ago for a minor bathroom renovation, a $2,000 job to update fixtures. Yet, I knew for a fact she'd added a massive sunroom, expanded her garage, and built what looked like a guest house in her backyard. My carpentry experience told me those weren't minor projects. They required permits, inspections, and approval from the very HOA board she lorded over the rest of us. Armed with this information, I started documenting everything. Early morning jogs became reconnaissance missions. I took photos from public sidewalks, careful to stay within my legal rights. The evidence was overwhelming, and my professional eye caught details that would have escaped a casual observer. The sunroom alone had to be over 800 square feet. I could pace it off from the street. The expanded garage violated setback requirements. It was clearly too close to the property line. The guest house, if that's what it was, appeared to have full utility connections. I could see the electrical meter and what looked like a separate water line. Under county zoning laws, that made it an illegal secondary dwelling unit. But the most damning evidence came from Emma, of all people. She'd been riding her bike around the neighborhood and noticed that Patricia's mailbox was way taller than everyone else's. When I measured it, it was 42 inches tall, 6 inches over the HOA limit that had gotten Robert Delgado fined $300. "That's not fair," Emma said, her sense of justice clearly inherited from her mother. "If Mr. Delgado had to pay, why doesn't she?" "Good question, sweetheart," I said, taking more photos. "Very good question." I compiled everything into a detailed report with photographs, permit records, and relevant code citations. Years of project management had taught me the importance of thorough documentation. I cross-referenced building codes, zoning laws, and HOA regulations. I created a timeline of construction activities based on my observations and dated photographs from Google Earth's historical imagery. The county building department took my complaint seriously. Within a week, I watched from my living room window as 2 official vehicles pulled up to Patricia's mansion. The inspectors spent over 3 hours on her property, and I could see Patricia following them around, her arms waving animatedly, her voice occasionally carrying across the street in shrill protests. "Daddy, what are those men doing at Mrs. Hawthorne's house?" Emma asked, pressing her face against the window. "Their job," I said, unable to keep the satisfaction out of my voice. The stop work order appeared on her gate the next morning, bright orange and impossible to miss. I was getting Emma ready for school when I noticed it, and I may have done a little fist pump that made my daughter giggle. "Are you happy about something, Daddy?" "Just having a good morning, sweetheart." The HOA emergency meeting was called 3 days later. News of Patricia's code violations had spread through Oakwood Heights like wildfire. The community center was packed beyond capacity, with people standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. I recognized faces I'd only seen in passing over the years, all united by a common grievance against our self-appointed neighborhood dictator. The atmosphere crackled with years of suppressed frustration. Emma was staying with her grandmother that night, so I could focus on what I suspected would be a very eventful meeting. Margaret Sullivan was the first to stand when the floor was opened for comments. Her 70-year-old frame trembled with indignation as she recounted being fined $200 for planting coral roses instead of red ones, even though the HOA guidelines only specified warm-colored roses. "I'd been gardening for 50 years, she said, her voice shaking. 50 years. And this woman tells me I don't know what warm colors are? I paid the fine because she threatened to place a lien on my property. A lien? Over roses? The room murmured with sympathetic anger. Robert Delgado followed, describing his $300 fine for a mailbox that measured 38 inches tall when the limit was 36 inches. I measured her mailbox afterward, he said, pointing across the room at Patricia, who sat in the front row with her arms crossed. 42 inches. When I mentioned it, she said hers was grandfathered in. Grandfathered? It's not even 5 years old. The stories kept coming, each one more ridiculous than the last. Jennifer Park had been fined for hanging wind chimes that were too melodious and disruptive, while Patricia's outdoor speaker system blasted classical music every evening. Tom Bradley received a violation for his kids' chalk drawings on his own driveway, deemed visual pollution, while Patricia's garish lawn ornaments went unmentioned. My 6-year-old drew a rainbow, Tom said, his voice breaking slightly. A rainbow. And she called it visual pollution. Each story added fuel to the collective anger that had been simmering for years. When Patricia tried to defend herself, claiming she had verbal approvals for her additions from the previous board president, the room erupted. Verbal approvals aren't worth the paper they're not written on, someone shouted from the back. The previous board president was your brother-in-law, called out another neighbor. He mysteriously moved out of state right after approving your sunroom. The current board president, a mild-mannered accountant named Steve Chen, had to call for order multiple times. When he finally managed to restore some semblance of calm, he announced that a motion had been made to remove Patricia from the board. All in favor? He asked. Every hand in the room went up except Patricia's. She sat there, her face cycling through shades of red and purple as neighbor after neighbor detailed her hypocrisy. When Steve announced that all pending fines would be reviewed and likely dismissed, including mine, Patricia stood up abruptly. This is a witch hunt, she screamed, her composure finally cracking. You're all jealous because I have the most beautiful property in the neighborhood. The room fell silent. Then, slowly, people began to laugh. Not cruel laughter, but the kind of laughter that comes from years of pent-up frustration finally being released. Patricia stormed out, her heels clicking furiously on the community center floor. The sound echoed in the sudden quiet, and then the room erupted in cheers. But Patricia's troubles were just beginning. Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood watched with fascination as her carefully constructed empire began to crumble. A neighbor who worked at the county tax assessor's office quietly mentioned that they were investigating whether she'd been claiming homestead exemptions on both properties before combining them. Insurance fraud investigators started sniffing around after someone reported that she'd filed claims for storm damage to structures that didn't officially exist. The state contractors board opened their own investigation when they discovered the workers doing her renovations weren't properly licensed. I learned from Jim Fitzgerald, who lived 2 houses down from Patricia, that she'd been running an illegal bed and breakfast out of her guest house. Look at this, Jim said, showing me his phone screen. She's been advertising it on vacation rental sites as a luxury private suite. She's charging $300 a night. The screenshots showed professional photos of the unpermitted structure's interior, exposed brick walls, a gas fireplace, a kitchenette, and a king-sized bed with Egyptian cotton sheets. The rates she was charging were astronomical, capitalizing on our neighborhood's proximity to downtown. The county zoning department added operating an illegal commercial enterprise in a residential zone to her growing list of violations. Months passed, and Patricia's mansion became the neighborhood's most expensive eyesore. The stop work order remained firmly in place as she battled the county in court. Construction debris littered her once pristine yard. The half-finished guest house stood exposed to the elements, its framing slowly weathering and warping. Word got around that she was hemorrhaging money on legal fees, trying to get variances for structures that never should have been built in the first place. The county remained unmoved, especially after discovering her basement renovation had compromised load-bearing walls without engineer approval. The foundation is compromised, I overheard one of the county inspectors telling his colleague. The whole structure could be unstable. Emma and I often walked past her house on our evening walks with Rusty. What had once been an intimidating symbol of wealth and power now looked like a construction site that had been abandoned mid-project. Why doesn't she just fix it, Daddy? Emma asked one evening as we paused at the corner. Pride, I said, watching Patricia's silhouette move past an upstairs window. Sometimes pride costs more than people can afford. The final blow came when the county announced they were considering forcing her to subdivide her property to bring it into compliance with lot size restrictions. Apparently, when she'd bought and combined 2 properties years ago, she'd never properly rezoned the land. The illegal additions just made everything worse. Her property attorney was spotted leaving her house with boxes of documents, and was overheard at the local coffee shop saying it was the most expensive mess he'd seen in 30 years of practice. At the community meeting where the subdivision was announced, Patricia sat in the back row, a shadow of her former imperious self. Her usually perfect hair hung limp, and the designer clothes had been replaced with a wrinkled tracksuit. She looked like she'd aged a decade in a few months. The county official, a stern woman named Carol Rodriguez, explained the situation with bureaucratic precision. Between the building code violations, the illegal commercial operation, the tax issues, and the zoning infractions, Mrs. Hawthorne is facing combined fines and penalties exceeding $275,000. The room went silent at the number. Emma squeezed my hand. I'd brought her to this meeting because I thought she should see how justice sometimes works, even if it takes time. Additionally, Carol continued, criminal charges are being considered for the unlicensed contractor work and potential tax evasion. Patricia let out a strangled sob. She stood up, swaying slightly, and pointed a shaking finger at me. Her voice cracked as she spoke. This is all your fault. You ruined my life over a stupid doghouse. Before anyone could respond, she rushed from the room, stumbling over chairs in her haste to escape. The sound of her sobs echoed in the hallway long after she'd disappeared. Emma looked up at me with wide eyes. Daddy, why is she so sad? Because she forgot something important, I said, gathering her into my arms. She forgot that rules are supposed to apply to everyone equally. That was the last time anyone saw Patricia at a community meeting. 3 weeks later, a for sale by bank sign appeared on her lawn, and within a month, moving trucks had hauled away what remained of her belongings. The house sold to a young family with 3 kids and 2 dogs. They tore down the illegal additions and built a proper playground in the backyard. Their kids' laughter now fills the air where Patricia's classical music used to echo. The new HOA board, led by Steve Chen, passed a resolution specifically allowing decorative pet shelters under 60 square feet. No permit required. Emma was thrilled when they featured Rusty's house in the monthly newsletter as an example of community pride and responsible pet ownership. I went home that night and added some finishing touches to Rusty's house. Emma helped me install miniature window boxes and paint tiny flowers on them. We even added a small nameplate that read Rusty's Castle in cheerful green letters. As we worked, Emma asked, Daddy, do you think Mrs. Hawthorne will be happier now? I considered the question carefully. I think she'll learn to be, I said finally. Sometimes people need to lose everything to remember what really matters. Emma nodded solemnly, then brightened. Like how Rusty was sad at the shelter but now he's happy because he has a family and a castle. Exactly like that, sweetheart. Rusty, hearing his name, emerged from his castle and wagged his tail at us. In the fading light of evening, our little family felt complete. Sometimes the best victories are the quiet ones, the ones that remind you that home isn't about having the biggest house or the most power over your neighbors. It's about love, fairness, and maybe a doghouse built with your own hands for a rescue dog who just needed a place to call home. The violation notice still sits in my desk drawer, not as a reminder of Patricia's tyranny, but as a reminder that sometimes standing up for what's right, even over something as small as a doghouse, can change everything. And every evening, as Rusty settles into his castle for the night, I'm reminded that the best structures aren't built to impress others. They're built with love, for the ones who matter most.